What's up, Joe? What's up, everybody? Today on Sports 360, we're talking with Jay Fee, a partner in the Boston office of the prestigious law firm of Nelson Mullins. Jay is the chair of his firm's sports law group, and he joins us today to talk about the business side of sports: sponsorships, licensing agreements, promotional rights, endorsements, and other arrangements. Jay and his group serve an impressive lineup of clients, including professional sports franchises, colleges and universities, corporations, regional broadcast networks, along with a number of individual athletes and entertainers. Jay has a wealth of experience and knowledge, and he's about to drop some of it on us right now. So stay where you are. We're coming right back with Jay Fee on Sports 360.
Scully Productions.
Today, I welcome to Sports 360 Jay Fee. Jay is a partner in the law firm of Nelson Mullins, where he is chair of the firm's sports law group, a group that is engaged in sponsorship, licensing, promotional rights, endorsements, and other sports business for a host of individual and institutional clients. Jay, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm great, Jeff. Thanks so much for having me today.
Thanks for carving out some time. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to the conversation, Jay, because I've been in sports for a long time, but I'm a labor lawyer by training. And so I know just enough about sports business to be dangerous, right? So I'm glad to have someone as knowledgeable as you and as experienced as you are to come on to the show and talk to us about various aspects of the business side of sports, particularly sponsorships, endorsements, and all the other things that you do. So I really do appreciate the time. And in that vein, Jay, when we talk about, sports sponsorships, endorsements, promotional rights, and those types of things, for someone like me, what exactly does that mean? What does it entail? And can you give us a few examples of what you and your group do at Nelson Mullins to help us understand that a little bit better?
Sure, Jeff, sure. Like you with a labor lawyer background, I started as a corporate transactional lawyer and did that for 6 years here in Boston, and quite by accident got involved in the sports industry. And I've worn a number of hats, but insofar as your question goes, we represent corporations and other business entities who seek to partner with various sports properties and then leverage those relationships to achieve their business objectives. The forms of those partnerships can be many. For example, stadium and arena naming rights, official marketing partnerships of a league or team, consumer product licensing, event titles and branding, such as the title sponsorship of a PGA Tour event, various uses of intellectual property, whether that be trademarks, copyrights, or patents, and then from time to time, brand ambassadorships, whereby we would be representing a company seeking to retain an athlete or a celebrity, or we may represent from time to time the athlete insofar as his or her relationship with that company. I also represent a number of other businesses where I'm helping them secure relationships on the other side of that equation. So I represent a global footwear business, an athletic apparel company, as well as a major golf equipment manufacturer and brand. So the form of those partnerships, and each one of those that I mentioned, have individual aspects of them that are somewhat unique. If you take, for example, the naming of a stadium, why do companies spend so much money on multi-year, long-term agreements for naming or branding a stadium, arena, or other venue? Really in today's world, it's about those companies primarily seeking those millennial population, the disposable income group, that is so very important to a lot of companies out there. They see branding today of a venue as a way to be where the eyeballs are, if you will. The viewerships today, modern viewership of television is down. We're not watching appointment television or tuning in at 5 o'clock or 7 o'clock on a Saturday and watching a sitcom or a TV drama. Those are all being taken back by DVR and other things. But what people are still watching are live sports, live action, live entertainment. And those activities are being hosted at a variety of venues across the United States, your stadiums, your arenas, and your concert venues. So to have your name associated with a stadium or an arena is a significant way, and a very large and bold way, if you will, to place your brand and your company in line and in view of that hugely desirable demographic.
And your comments raise a few questions for me, and I'll start here first. Let's stay with the stadium and arena naming rights, because I think about the deals that you do, in the various sponsorship and other categories that you mentioned. And one of the things I wanted to ask you was, other than economics, what kinds of considerations come into play? And so, for example, with these stadium deals, naming rights deals, I think about how, the match needs to be good, I think. I remember years ago, Jay, when I believe it was the Houston Astros. Before it was Minute Maid Park. I think it was Enron, right? I think it was.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
And then Enron went through the controversy there, and their name came off the stadium. So clearly, if you are a team, the reputation and other aspects of the potential partner are important. But also, I think sometimes practical things like the actual name of the company. I don't know if it's the Chicago White Sox, but one of them, right? Isn't it a guarantee rate stadium or something like that? Which,
yes, that's correct. Yeah.
It's and sometimes that sort of gets ridiculed in the public, right? It could be a good deal, right, financially, but it's one of those things where it just doesn't roll off the tongue. And so I just wonder, other than the economics, what kinds of considerations go into whether it's the naming rights deals or other deals? Some things that perhaps most people wouldn't think are important, but as someone who's experienced as you are, that there are other elements of a deal that are important.
Yeah. So staying on point with stadium, I have done a major NFL stadium deal, naming rights. I represented the global automotive company that was naming the stadium, and there were, in these types of contracts, what's interesting, there are a multitude of parties at the table. You'll have the team ownership. You'll have the league, the NFL in this case. You would have, the city may have representatives there. The land could be leased from a local sports authority on which the stadium sits. A host of parties are there, and each have their own particular concerns. For the community in which a stadium lies, it's really important that that brand be a quality brand, that it be one that is looking for ways to bring the community to the stadium, to have the stadium become an attribute and a positive venue and a drawing card for that stadium or that county. The team, from their perspective, they like the deals to be long-term. They like the brands to be extremely financially strong and stable, able to make payments time and time again. And they want to, as best as possible, avoid turnover of that name. Now, when you're representing a brand, some of the considerations are the sale of a company, the merger. I mean, you can go on Wall Street Journal every day. There's a pharma company being bought by another, or a merger of automotive companies being talked about, or whatever it might be. There is nothing out there today that is too large that can't change. So part of my job is to make sure we build in flexibility for the brand, that the stadium itself be well maintained, that it doesn't fall into disrepair, that the people operating that stadium are using it to the maximum possible capacity, that they're out constantly looking for new events. It's not just 8 or 9 football games in the course of a year. It's concerts. It's off-road ATV, big truck races, whatever it might be, motocross, bull riding. Whatever can be put into a stadium is very good for that stadium sponsor. And then, of course, if you're talking about an NFL stadium, the grand prize would be, does the community, does the city have the wherewithal to really attract a Super Bowl? And that is a win-win for everybody associated with those types of transactions. So hopefully that answers a little bit of your question. The other thing I'll say about sponsorships in general, Jeff, is that many times we're negotiating category exclusivity. Now, it's easy to get category exclusivity for a naming rights or of a venue or a stadium because you're the big ticket with paying the biggest check. Other sponsorships, when you get into areas such as financial services, healthcare, you have to be very careful about how you define the business of your client and make sure that the team or the league doesn't grant other sponsorship rights that infringe or cloud or confuse the public and the message that you're trying to send to your potential customers and fans out there as to what exactly your company does. So, category exclusivity, very, very important. You take banking, for example. You can have retail bank official partner, investment bank official partner, official credit card of the bank or the team or league. You get my point. It Sure. Can be kind of sliced and diced, and my job when I'm on the brand side is to make sure I eliminate or minimize those types of activities, which certainly are driven by revenue needs of the league and the teams, but nonetheless, we want the benefit of our bargain.
That's a really interesting point, Jay, because I can see where trying to create subcategories in for example, in banking or for as you just talked about, could lead to some confusion or some competition that maybe your client feels like I'm paying not to have that. I want the exclusivity. But on that point, Jay, and I may be mistaken here, but going back to the arenas, I seem to remember, and maybe it was an overlap, or maybe I just missed it, or I'm just off the farm on this one, but American Airlines Arena, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is there one in Miami and also one in Dallas? It seemed to me that there were two of them, and it caused confusion for me. And maybe it was that, American Airlines moved from one to the other in terms of the naming rights. But it would, you said, the naming rights for stadium is an easier one to get the exclusivity, and I can see and understand that. But you certainly would not want to have two stadiums with, especially in the same sport, with the same name, would you?
Well, I think it's happened before, Jeff. I don't know. I can't remember the American Airlines specifically, but, Mercedes-Benz was always associated with the Superdome down in New Orleans, and of course now they're have their name on the new stadium in Atlanta. So, whether a brand intentionally tries to do that, but that's two major venues. When you're looking at venues, this somewhat goes without saying, but as technology and engineering have advanced, the stadiums who have the ability to provide a retractable roof are very, very valuable to brands and sponsors. Because why? Because if you take a look at the Mercedes-Benz Dome in Atlanta, they'll be able to host a Final Four someday in college basketball. So a lot of indoor events as well as football. But it all depends on how companies want to spend their dollars. Sometimes you have overlap and duplication. Sometimes a company will just have a great opportunity, to name a stadium. I mean, obviously the biggest prize out there right now, and I don't believe I've seen it named, would be the new stadium in Los Angeles being built, and then there's another new stadium being built in Vegas. So both currently are unnamed.
Right. Well, Jay, one of the things that I've been really interested to get your opinion on is something that has been wildly successful in a very short period of time, and that is the NBA jersey patch sponsorships. Limited program. It started as a pilot program right in 2017. Right. Early estimations were give or take $100 million a year. And, I've seen reports that it's 50 to 60 or more $1 million above that projection. And so it really has been successful for the NBA and its franchises. What's your take on the NBA jersey patch sponsorships?
I had a privilege of representing a company that secured one of these patches. I won't go into who it was or what team, but as a result, I became very well versed with this initiative, and I think it is something that you have to look at as down the road for other applicability to other sports. But the patch deal, you're right. I mean, I think it did certainly start out as a 3-year term for all these agreements, and the pricing varied. The pricing wasn't established across the board by the league. The league let its individual owners and their sponsorship teams set the value based on marketplace and a host of different things. But don't be mistaken. The analytics and the exposure data that the league provided, that the league invested a lot of money in securing, was distributed out to a number of the different teams so they could go out and create, excellent marketing proposals for potential partners. You're right. I think financially it's been very successful. The range of prices in this area can vary from something 5 to 6 to 7 up to upwards of 20 million. That's been reported in the press. But what makes the patch deal unique is that other than the MLS, which has always had kit deals, which is their jersey patch, the NBA is the first of the major 4 leagues in North America to use this on game jerseys. Now, we've seen patching and branding on practice uniforms for a number of years in the NFL. Here up in Boston, for example, I believe Gillette has a patch on the Patriots practice jerseys, and a number of different NFL teams do that. But the game jerseys were the first in the NBA to have this patch. What makes it pretty unique is, even though you're doing a local marketing deal in the local team territory for the patch, that patch travels on all uniforms, all variations of the club's uniforms across all markets, home and away. Further, travels internationally, where the NBA is being followed in multiple countries around the world. So you're getting tremendous exposure, and some studies have suggested that the actual visibility on camera of that patch, given its location and players going to the foul line and close-ups, etc., could be anywhere from 15 minutes and up on average, given a game. Now, these patches are a great way for organizations to get their brand out, and we've seen a variety of them. Some come from very established brands, but interestingly enough, some have come from brands that you haven't heard about, which are more in e-commerce, like StubHub, which is the ticketing company, Rakuten with the Warriors, Bumble. There's a number of different ones, and then you have more traditional ones like Harley Davidson, I think, is with the Bucks, and General Electric is here in Boston with the Celtics. So, really a unique program. Now, the programs with the patch is just not throwing a 2.5-inch by 2.5-inch logo on the shirt. They're supported tremendously by other sponsorship and marketing assets that are secured during the course of that contract negotiation. But and I will point out too, the WNBA is doing a nice job in the patch area as well, and they're looking at that as an additional revenue stream for their teams as well.
And Jay, you mentioned that on the game jerseys, the NBA is the only sport among the 4 major North American team sports to have the patch deals, and yet it's doing very well. And part of what I wrestle with is what is keeping the other leagues from following suit. Many times we see in industries this copycat mentality. And if there's anything that seems to be worth copying, it would seem to be these patch deals. And one of the things, Jay, that I found to be really interesting concerning these patch deals is that about 2/3 of the companies that have signed on with NBA teams for the patch sponsorships they're doing business with teams or the league for the first time, right? And so I find that interesting, right? So it's an opportunity to go into new directions or whatever. But why do you think the other leagues, are they studying it? Are you hearing anything about any of the other leagues perhaps following the NBA's lead here and also allowing for jersey patch deals?
I do think they're studying it. I think the NBA on a number of fronts is a very progressive, forward-thinking league, currently under the leadership of Commissioner Silver. He was the first to talk about, legalized sports gambling as potentially acceptable in certain forms. But, baseball, I guess, some of these things, Jeff, and putting our agent's hat on, some of these things may be CBA required in terms of sign-off for uniform changes like this, revenue sharing under the salary cap systems. So it may not necessarily be a uniform or unilateral decision of the leagues. But, rest assured, I can say with some certainty that you're going to see this in another league probably within the next 2 to 3 years. I do know that there's one league already that has a habit of trying to put carve-outs into large sponsorship deals whereby they're putting sponsors on notice that this may someday happen. And if that does happen, then that's a new asset that they may either offer to an existing sponsor or, as we talked about with category exclusivity, it may cross over into category exclusivity as defined in a particular deal. So it is coming for sure, and I think it's going to be driven by the constant need to drive revenues in greater numbers. Now, I'm sure with the oncoming legalized gambling questions and things like that, and state by state approving those pieces of gambling legislation, that there'll be a pressure from sports books and other things to put branding on teams. Given how conservative some of these leagues are, I don't think that'll happen. But I do think you're going to see it. Whether it's a league might decide to do a league-wide branding on a uniform or on a helmet, as opposed to doing the model that the NBA did, which is market by market. So, but it is fascinating to see how it's been well received, and it has, interesting enough. Maybe it's because the inventory, traditional inventory, your digital and static signage and other things, that the traditional sponsors, the large brands, soft drinks, et cetera, have secured all that inventory and really didn't know quite what to make of this type of new asset. And maybe that's why they didn't jump on it when they had the opportunity to. But it has been fun to see, and I'm sure, with e-commerce and other new companies out there that are technology driven, I'm sure the league is very happy to be opening new relationships with different kinds of companies.
No question about it. I agree with that. And I also agree with what you said earlier, too, that I think some of these deals, if other leagues do jump in, would be a subject of collective bargaining, arguably. So, and I say that as a player advocate, of course, you have to bargain with us over it. But here's the other part of it, though. Under the NBA deal, players are getting half of the revenue, right? I mean, so they're sharing in the revenue. So I would think both leagues and players would want to, see if they can strike a deal, because there is a way to mutually benefit from them. So,
well, when you read I guess we're a few of the people that like reading collective bargaining agreements, but when you read the definition of hockey-related revenue in the NHL CBA or football-related revenue, there are a multitude of carve-outs as to what goes into the revenue pie in each sport. And it is that pie that is divided and is split 50-50 or 47-53, and that becomes in effect, your portion of the salary cap across all the teams in that league. So I'm sure with a new revenue source of this magnitude down the road, the Players Association will want to make sure that there are no such carve-out opportunities for ownership, and that funds will be shared when they're derived from, game shirt branding or et cetera.
Sure, no question about it. That's probably a fight that will be had at some point. Now, Jay, you mentioned the NBA being one of the more progressive leagues, if not the most progressive league out there among the major four. And I would agree with that in a number of respects, whether it's because of gambling or even some of the views they take on social issues and things of that sort, and how they support their players in the same. But one of the things, Jay, recently that I saw that the NBA made a change in its international sponsorship opportunities, right? That they're now allowing teams to pursue these international sponsorship opportunities. And it seemed to generate a lot of excitement among the clubs that they now, and it's limited. I think it's two, each team can do a maximum of 2 individual international sponsorships, but it seemed to be met with a lot of excitement by the clubs in the NBA. What's going on there? Why is that something that is such a big deal for the clubs?
Well, I think, it goes back to when I had the opportunity to work on one of the jersey patch deals. My client was provided with a lot of data in terms of the reach and the visibility and the exposure that these patches would have. And it's interesting. And these numbers are out there in other sources, but I mean, the NBA, probably of all the sports, is a truly international sport. And the fan penetration numbers across the globe are, for me, impressive and staggering, really. You look at mainland China, they count upwards of 170 million fans. Brazil, 27 million. the USA 90 million, and then Europe roughly say 50 million. So, the fan penetration of the NBA globally is right up there with F1 racing, with World Cup soccer, a variety of different things. So, as companies become more globalized, and economies become more interrelated, interdependent, being associated with a great sport like NBA basketball is got to be attractive to not just great United States companies, but companies that are based all over the world. And so I'm sure they see this as a tremendous revenue opportunity. It'll probably take a lot of getting used to, but I mean, we get a little parochial here in this country where it's, our companies are reaching out elsewhere. Well, there are companies outside the United States that want to reach this population, those 90 million basketball fans. So, what's to say they can't have that opportunity? So, to answer your question, I think that's what's driving a lot of the excitement.
Now, Jay, I want to turn to what I'm going to call, and whether this is a precise term or not, but, some of the emerging technologies out there, the digital marketplace, we have augmented reality, virtual reality, social media. But when you think about how technology has changed, you mentioned before about DVR, right? You're absolutely right. My wife is, she DVRs like everything. Okay. It's like,
right.
And there are times, right, where because she's DVRing so many things, I don't even know if that's a term, DVRing, but anyway, you know what I mean. Yeah. That I'm watching TV in another room, and it changes the channel because she has like 4 or 5 things being recorded, right? So, and I
gotta get another remote, my friend. You need another remote or something.
Yeah, I need something. But you're right about that. So the technology is obviously having an effect on how we being fans of the game and other consumers, how we're consuming content, right? Including sports content. Sure. So what do you see out there in terms of the emerging technologies, in terms of opportunities, challenges? And I know that's a broad question, Jay, but I'm just really curious as to how the world is evolving technologically, how that is affecting the sports sponsorship and endorsement business.
Yeah. And viewership, and how people are consuming sports content and live content. Yeah, I was thinking about this line of questioning, Jeff, and I saw some interesting data recently, just the other day actually. It goes to kind of the numbers are really, for me, they were, quite interesting. This report said 51% of the world, approximately 3.8 billion people, were using the internet in 2018. Advertising spending on the internet up 22% in 2018. Now, a lot of that is going to the Googles and the Facebook of the world, but others are getting growing share of that. Amazon, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram. The other thing that's staggering in the technology area for me that obviously sponsors are taking a really hard look at is the number of interactive gamers worldwide. And this same report said that number of interactive gamers worldwide grew 6% to 2.4 billion. People playing Fortnite and other such games. And then the number of people watching those people play is growing rapidly. So, I think the internet and the ability and the growth and the number of users and the improved technology and bandwidth and other abilities to properly stream things without buffering in the old days or interruptions is really changing the way in which we consume content rather, and the types of content that we're finding. What I just said affects a lot of the following. For example, sponsorships. If you've got that many people on the internet, whether it's through esports or content being driven on Google, Amazon, baseball games are now on Amazon, I believe, and Facebook. So advertising dollars are going to go there. Sponsorships are going to go there. A lot of talk, of course, in our industry about over-the-top streaming of live events. The other thing that fascinates me with technology is the creation of niche content. So your ESPN Plus, for example. Now we have the ability with digital streamed content to, if you're a lacrosse fan, if you're an NCAA swimming and diving fan, if you're into tennis, crew, college baseball, whatever it might be, you have the ability to almost take that talent down on demand for appointment watching at your leisure, because there's so much of that content out there. And technology is enabling us to do that, both to produce that content and to view it. The data analytics, this is an issue that all of the players' associations are sure dealing with, but tracking devices, the ability to determine the amount of separation between a wide receiver and a defensive back, the historical matchups between player A and player B, puck possession in hockey. I mean, the time in zone. I mean, all of these things are being tracked. Tremendous amounts of data are being generated. I would submit to you that a lot of that data is going to find its way into the world of legalized sports gambling. And it will be used and analyzed and dissected to create more and more information for people to set odds and to place bets. And then the other thing with technology, with social media, Jeff, is the whole situation involving the players themselves, the players in professional sports. I think technology is now giving players a greater opportunity and more ways to go directly to fan bases. Historically, the players were the teams, and the teams controlled so much of that. And now we're seeing players with huge social media followings, whether it be professional golfers or team athletes, out there posting video, out there showing behind-the-scenes life, out there, creating content, music, whatever it might be. They're using technology to go directly to fan bases. And sponsors and other, brands like that. If that player has a fit, a demographic, which his social media profile reaches, that creates value for that player. And it's a very cost-efficient way for, companies to reach potential customers by and through athletes. So I think you're going to see a lot more of that in tech as a great use of technology. The challenges in all of that is that I guess with the freedom of expression through a multitude of platforms, it just becomes harder to control. And, brands like to control messaging, and they like to control how messages are delivered. So, we've seen multitude of times where players, celebrities, et cetera, have gotten involved in difficult situations because of statements being made. So, that's kind of a balancing point that people have to be aware of. But I'm seeing more and more sophistication in the way players and teams, for that matter, are leveraging and finding ways to monetize the ability to touch fan bases in new and different ways.
And Jay, you hit on so many interesting points there. You talked about the internet and streaming. Streaming certainly opening up all types of opportunities for leagues and for their clubs. You talked about players and their social media platforms and the opportunities that that creates. And then also the tracking of data.
Mm.
And yeah, some of it could be the puck speed and ball speed and that kind of thing. But then there's also some of the wearable technology, and where players associations and leagues aren't seeing eye to eye on a number of important issues regarding that type of data, particularly in terms of ownership, right? So there's all kinds of issues that are related here as the technology emerges, and content is able to be created in new ways or delivered in new ways. And of course, with the leagues and players all involved in trying to grow the game economically for their individual and collective benefits, create some opportunities, but also perhaps some challenges and perhaps some legal fights down the road. So a lot of interesting things as it relates to technology and emerging technology and sports business.
I would I would agree, and I think in many respects, uh, law and precedent and other situation, other we're catching up to the technology, and we're trying to catch up. I'll give one that would keep me up at night would be the wearable technology question. Well, whose data is being collected? Who owns that data?
Mm-hmm.
Absent a release from the player, I would submit the player owns that data. And what do you do with that data, even if they are permitted to collect it? What if that data were to be compiled in such a way that some expert concludes that player X has a health issue? You get involved in health issues and conclusions about one's health, but projecting one's capabilities, physical capabilities, you're in an awful slippery area. And that can affect livelihoods. There are a number of different things that come to mind there. So, data is great, but
yes, no question. I think I'm sorry, Jay.
No, I would just say that data is great. Data is powerful, and who has control of that data and how it is used is, I submit to you, can be rather dangerous, depending on what side of the table you're on.
Totally agree. And so that's why I think, that particular area, as you said, I think there's a lot of catch up in terms of, understanding the legal ramifications of this information that's able to be collected, who owns it. You have other issues, as you said, confidentiality, security, right? You don't want this information getting into the wrong hands. So it's all kinds of issues related to that. But Jay, let's switch gears for a minute, because in addition to your sports business work, and I'm sure we just scratched the surface of it, and I would hope at some point you would come back again and we can talk about maybe some discrete issues that are out there or some additional issues on the business side. But in addition to your work there, you are also a certified agent in Major League Baseball and the National Hockey League, correct?
Yeah, well, I just probably gave up my NHL certification back in 2016, but
Okay.
because I'm not recruiting NHL or NHL prospect players anymore here at the law firm. I am still representing a big league pitcher, so I was a NHL certified agent for 24 years and MLB for probably the last 7 years, I guess. So, but yeah, I've had a great run in both areas. Yep.
Yeah, and I've worked in baseball for over 20 years now, and had the opportunity a few years back to do some work for the NHLPA in terms of grievance arbitration and salary arbitration. And
Yeah.
one of the things I enjoyed was seeing and experiencing the different player culture, I'll call it. That the players in baseball and the players in hockey, they're different. I found them to be different, but it was refreshing for me after spending so many years in baseball. And both players are great, so there's no disparaging comments being made here. But they were just different. They're just, different culture. You have a lot of European players, for example, in hockey, of course. And and there's a lot of diversity as well in baseball. But it was just different, and it was refreshing for me to have that opportunity. As someone who spent, you said, over 20 years in hockey and 7 years in baseball, how do you find the differences in terms of the business side of it? I mean, yeah, you're negotiating contracts, but I would imagine that there is some differences there in terms of how each of the industries operate. What's been your experience?
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking about similarities and differences in the two sports, and I have had a privilege to represent some amazing people, and I feel privileged to have been able to do so. When you're an agent, you're also part of the Players Association because you derive your authority from your certification, and it is the Players Associations that empower agents by and through the authority the associations get from their collective bargaining agreements. They're allowed to pass that authority on down to certified, qualified agents. So, in terms of similarities, Jeff, I was thinking about, right now, I think both have excellent leadership, and both have a history of strong leadership. In both sports, you find yourself dealing as an agent with extremely young players, like high school level talent at age 18. Same in baseball. And then you can also be representing the more mature, physically more mature, emotionally more mature college players when they're coming out. Both associations do a really good job of kind of controlling the bar, I think, in terms of who can become an agent and what their qualifications are. I go back a long way in hockey, and I can remember hockey the days we didn't have a salary cap. And in the course of my agent career in hockey, we lost, 2 half seasons and a full season. A tremendous amount of value and salaries were lost due to very contentious, lockouts, which is a regret, in looking back at it. I wish, and I know baseball's had a long history, and I teach at some of my sports law class at the local law school here. I know what the battles that baseball took on to become the powerful union that they are now. But when you see the loss of value in the marketplace from the marketplace for people that have very short careers, you think about sports athletes. I always say, a career could be over, on the next shift, on the next inning, whatever it might be. But in large part, professional athletes, their career's over 33, 35, maybe 40 if they're fortunate. What other careers out there are like that? So it's really important that, whether you're a baseball player or you're a hockey player, you got to get good sound advice and counsel every step along the way to maximize that window of opportunity. But, and to your point, the other similarity would be that both international talent pools, right? I mean, we have tremendous amount of people from different countries in baseball, and tremendous amount of European countries in hockey. I've traveled to all the cold places on the planet, Jeff, in my earlier career, looking for hockey players. And my wife used to ask me why I wasn't in baseball sooner, because it seemed like they had warmer places to go.
That's right.
But on the mechanics of the deals, I think in the salary cap environment, your challenge as an agent is to, know your players' abilities and what they can bring to that particular ball club that you're talking to at the moment, and then fit the value proposition into the salary cap slot that might be available. I mean, with full salary disclosure and comparables in the marketplace, you as an agent pretty much know your client's value, and you know where a particular team has wherewithal or doesn't have wherewithal to find that player a roster spot. So, I see that as kind of similar. I think in terms of salary arbitrations, as you know, they probably couldn't be more different, in terms of when I was doing salary arbitrations, there was one arbitrator, and it was they were very subjective. I mean, I can't tell you the stories about sitting in arbitrations and sitting across from a general manager that just impugn the integrity, the character, the courage of my client, all subjective baloney in an effort to drive his salary down. And then, oh, okay, by the way, he did score 25 goals last year. So we had that. But as you know, these arbitrations are like preparing for, court litigation.
Right.
And then, on the baseball side, and you're so well versed in this area, much more so than I found it refreshing because in baseball it eliminates the subjectivity and the character views and opinions that are so subjective and baseless oftentimes and self-serving. And in baseball we have, two parties submitting their bid, if you will, driving to a midpoint, and most of the time, reaching a negotiated settlement. I think the process drives most salary differences or differences of opinion to a negotiated conclusion there. The other thing about baseball is I found extremely data-driven. The numbers are what the numbers are, and how you use them and how you tell the story with your analytics and your statistical measures really makes the difference in those types of baseball arbitrations. So, that's kind of my take on both of them. I would say that in terms of collective bargaining agreements, they have a big impact on the business side of sports too. And now that I represent a lot of companies, you'd be surprised how many companies don't really think about the collective bargaining agreement. And I say, well, this collective bargaining agreement on such and such a sport is going to be up in 2 years, and you're about to enter into a 6-year contract. Do you understand the implications of that? In terms of a work stoppage or some other interruption. So we need to raise awareness of the collective bargaining agreement, what it does, when it ends, build in protections for work stoppages and things like that. And then group licensing and how you use individual players. Every sport's a little different in that world. So, I think it's been fun to be in two sports in my career, and it's certainly, what I learned in each sport I continue to use, on a daily basis.
And Jay, you mentioned something at the tail end there that I was specifically going to ask you, but now you addressed it somewhat, and that was, when you look at, these two sports, baseball and hockey, and, football and basketball, all these sports have had, it's, their fair share of work stoppages, whether lockouts or strikes, some more than others, obviously. But I was wondering about the very thing you touched on, and that is, having worked in these two sports where we have had some disruptions in gameplay, do you take that into account on the business side? And you just answered that, and you said yes, you do. But it sounded as if that is part of client education, because some clients may not be aware of that type of a connection, that the collective bargaining agreement is expiring in 2 years, 3 years, whatever the case may be.
Right.
And the rhetoric has not been too positive. You know what I mean? And I could imagine that could make it tough for business, particularly among those clients or potential clients who maybe are more aware of the intersection between the business side and the labor relations side.
Yeah, no question. And, I think with the significant, 7-8-figure annual payouts that you're looking at with some of these sponsorships, when a league goes dark, in my view, there's not much value left to whatever elements of the sponsorship agreement you're dealing with. And it goes right down to fan bases. I mean, the teams or leagues will say, well, we're still going to be putting out content and highlights from past games, and we're going to be reaching our fans. From having gone through lockouts in the NHL and being from a Boston here, I can tell you when hockey wasn't playing games, no one felt good about the sport. And that has economic impacts, not just to the players and the agents and the owners, but to all of the businesses that are associated with a sport. You know, the bars, the vendors, the taxi cabs, the Uber drivers now. I mean, who knows? I mean, so, you know, I think it's incumbent upon me to, you know, use my industry knowledge and bring that to sponsors so that they're aware of the possibilities of what a short or protracted work stoppage might mean to this relationship. You know, it's not something that teams or leagues. It's not an enjoyable conversation when I bring that up.
Sure.
But you know, it's all part of the negotiation. But it goes down to even a finer point. You know, there's been a lot of talk about pace of play in baseball, Jeff. You know, a sport you're very familiar with. And when you think about pace of play in shorter games, I think it's in many respects it's going to be good. At how it's going to be implemented is another story that the union will work out with the league, I'm sure. But for a sponsor, you know, I had one ask me, well, wait a minute, that means they'll be in the ballpark for shorter periods of time. They won't see my signage as much. And if I run television commercials, there'll be fewer television commercials. So, you know, you can see how it has a trickle-down effect to the sponsors and stuff. And, you know, it's just kind of interesting how there is a nexus between, you know, the labor negotiations and the collective bargaining agreement and the economics of a particular sport and all the different stakeholders that have a part of those dollars.
Sure. And Jay, I think among other things, that's what makes, for me anyway, working in sports so interesting, that you have all of these kind of moving parts and you know, having to navigate them presents challenges that I think, as a lawyer, as both of us are, you know, it really makes it enjoyable, you know, to work in the industry. So no doubt about that. But Jay, listen, man, I really, really enjoyed this conversation today, and you know, I know we just scratched the surface, and there's a lot more that we can talk about concerning your work in sports business. But I do appreciate you taking some time and sharing some of your insights and knowledge with us. And I look forward to you coming back again to talk about, you know, maybe some other aspects that we didn't get a chance to hit on today. But I do thank you for taking, you know, some time out of your busy day to join us here on the show.
Well, Jeff, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I know I've been looking forward to it. I have nothing but tremendous respect for you and your reputation in the industry. So love to come back when you want me. You'll just have to deal with my hard-charging agent to book again. But
That's right. That's right. Well, I appreciate the kind comments, Jay, and I do appreciate the time, and look forward to catching up with you. And as we're sitting here, we're about a week or so from the 4th of July, and I hope you and your family have a great holiday.
Same to you, Jeff. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Thanks, Jay.